The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Europe is in shock just days before the German federal elections. Recent statements by several officials of the Trump administration suggest Germany, Ukraine, and the European Union are now on their own, as Trump suddenly recites Vladimir Putin's talking points. The war in Ukraine, the economic crisis, and a series of attacks by asylum seekers are unsettling many German voters. Now, the country's most important ally is turning its back. The U.S. is negotiating directly with Russia, bypassing the Europeans. America is no longer a warrant of safety in the region. At the same time, representatives of the Trump administration are interfering in the electoral process by openly endorsing the partially far-right AfD. To the point, we ask Trump and Putin, a new alliance to weaken Europe?
In my view, and I feel very confident is the right word, but I feel sure about it, is that there is no going back. There is absolutely no going back to the warm embrace of the United States as the transatlantic guarantor and Europe, frankly, sitting on its hands. And for all countries, France, UK and others, it's seismic. But for Germany, multiply that by 10. Because Germany has nothing else and nobody else to fall back on apart from the twin planks of Europe, the European Union, and wider NATO and the United States. And when all of that is thrown into question, it is truly frightening for Germany.
However, we must admit, and Slovakia does admit this, that our armed forces have been built into peacetime. They were built in a way that, as though there would never be another war in our continent. So unfortunately today, this is what it looks like. It's the condition and the state of armed forces of European countries. And the war has shown us completely, in a naked truth, that our military forces are not ready here in Europe to face any threat, no matter where from such threat would come.
And what about your armies? Are they ready? And if Russia launches a false flag operation or just straight up with no insignia from Belarus, like how Crimea got taken in 2014, how fast will the allies respond? And will they respond at all? Yesterday here in Munich, the US Vice President made it clear. Decades, he said, decades of the old relationship between Europe and America are ending. From now on, things will be different, and Europe needs to adjust to that. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in Europe, and I'm sure you believe too. And I urge you to act for your own sake and for the sake of Europe, people of Europe, your nations, your houses, your children, and our shared future. For this, Europe has to become self-sufficient, united by common strengths, Ukrainian and European.
Many Americans don't have a clue about how violently our allies are condemning our foreign policy because, well, we're just not interested here in America very much in foreign policy. We have other local things that we're interested in, but we better get interested in foreign policy because, let me tell you, the rest of the world is very interested in it.
That last bit from my father's Key of David program, that was from 2014, over 10 years ago. You know, that's, I was just telling the guys before going live, just how many different angles there are to all that's happening it's hard to wrap your mind around it, but again, you step back, you look at the bigger picture, you understand that the signature prophecy that Herbert Armstrong proclaimed for decades, and then my father following in his footsteps, preparing you for this moment. The sure word of Bible prophecy. It is sure. It's certain. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. You can get to the live video stream of this program at trumpetdaily.com or at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/Trumpet Daily. Also over at YouTube. We'll get to some of the comments that surely are angering the elites in Europe. Comments from Donald Trump yesterday down in Miami. My father brings this out in great again. I mean, this is a man, say what you will about his policy. A lot of people hate it. A lot of people overseas hate it. And a big reason why is because he's exposing so much corruption. We've kind of singled out Putin this week. You don't do deals with the devil, as we've been saying. But you know, Germany has a history of doing deals with Putin, with Russia. We'll talk about that as we proceed. And there's a lot of corruption in Ukraine as well. There's corruption all over the world. And in great again, my father says, you know, one particular strength of Donald Trump is that he exposes a lot of this. He's exposed so much here in the United States, and now he's exposing a lot of it abroad. It's so easy, as I say, to hate on Trump, to hate on America. As another one of our news gatherers said this morning, I mean, if not for God's perspective, you know, it's almost impossible not to choose sides here. Well, I'm with Europe, or I'm with Ukraine, I'm with Germany. I'm with Russia. I'm with Trump. I'm against Trump. All that matters is what God thinks, what God says, what God prophesies. And you know, another angle to this story is just how the many problems of this world, they're unsolvable. Man cannot solve them. That's one of the central lessons that God's going to try to teach us as we go through these twists and turns, as it culminates in the Great Tribulation, just as Jesus prophesied. And then finally, the spectacular return of Jesus Christ to this earth. Where do you hear about that? Who talks about it? Who's anticipating it? I mean, we've seen so many other fulfilled prophecies. You go back to the head tilt, July 13. This just been nonstop. God intervening in the affairs of mankind. God trying to get our attention. God telling us, warning us, you better turn your wicked heart toward God and ask for forgiveness. Ask for God out of his goodness to lead you to repentance. Romans 2, verse 4. It's electrifying, really, when you think about prophecy being fulfilled. Europe is, what did that first guy say? Europe is in shock. They're in shock. They're acting. Finally. We've been predicting this. We've been prophesying this for decade after decade after decade. And now we're seeing them move very quickly to one united military force because, well, I mean, what an easy excuse. You've got Donald Trump out there and he's reciting Vladimir Putin's talking points. We've had some stories at the Trumpet over the years. This one from 2022. Why Germany just betrayed America. And then another one. Germany and Russia's secret war against America. That's from 2018. And then what about, if they're so terrified of Russian aggression, and they say everyone, including America, ought to be terrified, and in America's case, you keep sending $350 billion more dollars. If Germany's so terrified, listen, Putin is building his empire. He wants to restore the old Soviet Union. And he sees Ukraine as the breadbasket of his empire. He's coveted Ukraine ever since he's been in power. And this is, never mind what Trump's gotten a lot of things wrong this week, implying that Ukraine started the war and not coming out and saying that Russia's the aggressor. Of course, Russia's been the aggressor. But then you've got Zelenskyy for his part, basically blackmailing the Biden administration. You think Trump was the one in 2018 that urged Zelenskyy to look into the Biden crime family, Burisma, Hunter. You remember getting paid $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 per month? Zelenskyy knows all about that. Zelenskyy helped cover it up. Donald Trump got impeached for it. There's plenty of corruption to go around. Just remember that next time you hear some European elitist get up and lecture the United States. How dare J.D. Vance lecture us? Yeah, you can't do that. Trump pointing out yesterday, yeah, we just threw $350 billion at this war, and the only thing Europe will do is give loans, and they get paid back. What about America? You think the European elites like hearing that? You think Germany likes hearing that? This is what Trump did in the first term. He went over there and told them to their faces, you guys are you're grifters. You're living off U.S. handouts, just like so many people in America. It's like a drug. It's like an addiction. And Zelenskyy went with it as long as he possibly could. And now, he's singing a very different tune. You can say what you will about Trump attacking him. It's gone back and forth. Zelenskyy says Trump, he's a victim of misinformation. So he's bringing back the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. There's plenty of corruption to go around. And it just highlights man's inability to solve his own problems. They're just getting worse, just like 2 Timothy 3 says. Evil men and seducers would wax worse and worse. Listen, Donald Trump's not the only one that would negotiate with Vladimir Putin. There's plenty of world leaders that generally they do it behind closed doors. They do it secretively, a lot of them. But if it serves their interests, they'll sit down and talk to Vladimir Putin. Bible prophecy comes alive in Ukraine. My father wrote this 3 years ago. 3 years ago, almost to this day, February 24th. He says, I've been warning for more than 2 decades that Vladimir Putin would be responsible for violent conquests and that he would set in motion some astonishing and historic events. That's right, 2008, under George W. Bush's watch, 2014, under the dear leader's watch. This is when he made his aggressive advance. It mostly during Joe Obama years. If Trump is right about one thing, Vladimir Putin didn't advance during his first term. Now, whether or not it's true that it never would have happened had they not stolen the election from Donald Trump in 2020, I guess it's an open question. But the fact remains, Putin wasn't on the march from 2017 to 2020. But he definitely started marching in 2022. 3 years. And people getting slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. An estimated 900,000 Russians, 700,000 Ukrainians. Donald Trump said this yesterday. Who even talks about the numbers? The bloodshed, the slaughter. An entire younger generation of Russians and Ukrainians. In one sense, it certainly shows how much of a prized possession Ukraine really and truly is to Vladimir Putin, the Prince of Rosh. We talk about him in this booklet. It's so important to Putin and his empire that he's willing to sacrifice almost a million Russians on this conquest. But don't forget, the real aggressive steps of conquest, it happened with Crimea 2014, the dear leaders here, and then, of course, Joe Biden in 2022. Trump gets in there and says, we need a ceasefire. I mean, the whole world cries out for a ceasefire as soon as there's 12 people caught in collateral damage in Gaza. Then there's demands from Germany, from all over the world, everywhere. Israel, you've got to stop. You've got to stop shooting. Where are those demands? Well, it's just Donald Trump. He's the problem. There's a lot of hypocrisy, a double standard, double dealings, back channel dealings. This has been man's way. You're really getting a pretty good insight into the way nations think when it's about their interests first. That's what it is now for America. I mean, even with the statements that Donald Trump has gotten wrong this week, again, you look at what he's campaigned on, you look at what he's promised, he views everything through the prism of America's first. Is this serving America's interest to send $350 billion to Ukraine, half of which Zelenskyy doesn't even know what happened to it? He knows about the Biden crime family. He helped to cover it up. And in that sense, he helped the communist left to steal the election in 2020. This so-called champion of democracy in Ukraine. Coming back to Putin. Putin applied all that pressure on Ukraine because that nation is the linchpin of his goal of a renewed imperial Russia. Putin's on the march. There's no getting around that. But if Eastern Europe, if they're so terrified of Russia's advance, well, then why don't you do something about it? Well, now they have to. And how convenient. Well, just blame it on Orange Hitler. Orange Hitler stabbed us in the back. So now we finally have an excuse to build an army, and no one's going to even bat an eye at the fact that Germany's leading this expedition, this rebuild. A newly militarized Germany. It says here, we need to watch what's happening in Russia and how Europe responds to it. Daniel 11:44 talks about things out of the east troubling Europe. So now we're seeing it. They're troubled. And there's a lot of nations that are concerned. A lot of European nations that are concerned that America is leaving, yes, it's a gross miscalculation on the Trump administration's part. But think about these other nations. I'm talking about the other kings that are just going to happily say, look, Germany, you have the biggest economy, you have the most money, you have the most power, so yeah, take the lead. Take over our unified military. And we're all going to start spending a lot more. You're in charge. The most important nation to watch right now is Germany. That's what my father said in that 2022 piece. Germany's got elections coming up, I think this Sunday, right? And a lot of commentators just furious, not just with Donald Trump and what he's doing with Putin, not inviting all the European leaders into that discussion. Well, America's the one that's underwriting the whole thing, the war, Ukraine's effort. Now suddenly Europe said, hey, we demand to be involved. As I say, it's exposing a lot of hypocrisy, duplicity, a lot of double dealing. But keep the focus on Germany. Mr. Armstrong, Herbert Armstrong was talking about that. Keep your focus there for decades. When Germany was being held down, basically, by NATO, by the superpower America. Why the Trumpet watches Europe's ongoing unification project. This is at the website. It's 2017. This is 8 years old. The world hasn't been frightened by a European military since the Second World War. The European Union is an inefficient, cumbersome collection of states beset with conflicting interests, bogged down by bureaucracy, and seemingly incapable of ever becoming a formidable global leader, let alone a lethal imperial superpower. I mean, how could this happen? They've just been grifting off the U.S. financially, certainly for their defense. But 1,500 years of European history should warn us against underestimating the destructive power of Europe nations. You want to underestimate Germany's power? Let's look not just back to World War II. Let's look at 1,500 years of history. Let's look at all 7 resurrections of the Holy Roman Empire. That's some history we discuss right here in this free booklet. No cost, no obligation. The Holy Roman Empire in prophecy. What does God have to say? On this show, on the Trumpet.com, we're not here to pick sides. We're here to give you the truth, to tell you how all of this is going to unfold. I mean, Europe is shocked, as you heard there in the cold open. Europe's ready to act. This is significant. And we've been watching it for decades. We must not merely look at Europe in its current state. It must be studied in its historical context. And we ought to consider Europe's potential. The EU is home to over 500 million people, nearly 10% of the global population. Its economy is twice the size of China's and much larger than America's. 1/5 of all the world's economic activity happens in the EU. European nations have 1.5 million personnel in their armed forces. This is what's being unleashed. This is superpower status, as I've been saying this week. And nobody sees this development as dangerous. Not one commentator. To the contrary, I mean, they're out there cheering it on. The Trumpet forecasts that Europe will unite and it will become a formidable global dynamo. The unity Europe attains will not be perfect. It will not come about easily or peacefully, and it certainly will not endure. But Europe is going to become a united superpower and a serious, daunting global power. We wrote this in 2017. Tomorrow's news today. You heard it here first. You heard it way back in the 1940s and 50s. Even as Germany was being rebuilt by the United States of America, the good old Marshall Plan, the United States of America, as I said earlier this week, funding the world for the most part, just paying for everything. I mean, hey, as I said yesterday, we're even paying for the Taliban. We're funding the Taliban. The emergence of this new Europe will have far-reaching and dramatic consequences for us all. And then it talks about the belligerent behavior of Vladimir Putin, how that's going to accelerate these many prophecies, the development of this Holy Roman Empire. And then you think about, together with that, Putin rebuilding his empire. Together with that, you lose the American security umbrella. I mean, we basically eliminated the deterrence that Ukraine had back in the 1990s, thanks to the Clinton administration. As I say, there's corruption, there's mistakes, catastrophic mistakes to go around. Every nation has them because every nation is run by human beings that come under the influence of the prince of the power of the air. Ephesians 2:2. Human nature. This is Satan's world. The biggest news happening right now is in Germany. Herbert Armstrong wrote that in 1959. Think about that for a second. 1959. He said here, for more than 25 years, I've been telling the radio audience that there will rise in Europe a resurrection of the ancient Roman Empire. It's to be called the United States of Europe. It says here, it may be called by some other name, but it will be a union of 10 nations in Europe under one dictator super king. So Europe's about to get its strongman. It says, in America, we are prone to see only one enemy at a time. So Russia's an enemy, or maybe China. And Trump, for his part, he's probably trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. But we know that's a prophesied alignment too. That's part of the kings of the East. But we're just so short-sighted. We see one big bad enemy at a time, and we can't see. We look at our enemies from World War II, less than a century ago, and we see them today as allies. It says there has been a very great deception about Russia. Mr. Armstrong said in 1959, I've been telling you all along that Russia is not going to plunge us into World War III now. Russia's not going to attack the United States. I've been telling you, even though we look on Germany as an ally, that Germany is the nation for us to watch. That's what Mr. Armstrong said in 1959. This is what my father said in 2017. I mean, with this work, you get a consistent message. And look, with God intervening in all the ways that he has, with so many detailed head tilts, it's time that we sit up and take note and consider what God is trying to show us, what he's trying to teach us. The message has been consistent. Watch Germany, and these quotes, I give them to you at a time when, as I say, we're coming right up to Germany's election. Listen to Zelenskyy. This is from his Munich speech, I think, that he gave on Saturday, clip 8.
3 years of full-scale war have proven that we already have the foundation for a united European military force. And now, as we fight this war and lay the groundwork for peace and security, we must build the armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends only on Europeans, and decisions about Europe are made in Europe.
There we go. NATO established to keep Russia out, keep America in, and keep Germany down. That's over. There may still be some kind of NATO alliance in name only, but you listen to the world leaders, you hear the commentators, and you see what's happening. America's out, and Russia's on the march, and Germany needs to take the lead for Europe's defense. Play another one from Zelenskyy. This is clip 9.
And we need the same approach when it comes to diplomacy, working together for peace. Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement. We must give strength to Europe first. Does America need Europe as a market? Yes. But as an ally, I don't know. For the answer to be yes, Europe needs a single voice, not a dozen different ones. A few days ago, President Trump told me about his conversation with Putin. Not once did he mention that America needs Europe at the table. That says a lot. The old days are over when America supported Europe just because it always had.
Wow, it's pretty bold on his part. We've got to put Europe first. And okay, maybe we need America's market, but do we really need them as an ally? Do we need them as an ally What? Yeah, that's Vladimir Zelenskyy. After receiving $350 billion, he was holding Biden over the barrel of a gun, for sure. It's blackmail. He knows about Ukrainian corruption. And it's not like President Trump hasn't negotiated with him or his people. Okay, so Trump said yesterday, if he wants to come to Saudi Arabia to get in on the negotiations, go ahead. Listen to Fox News as they talk about the back and forth between these two world leaders, Donald Trump and Zelenskyy. Clip 10.
I think we have to remember President Zelenskyy has really allowed himself to be politicized by the Biden administration. Remember when he went to Pennsylvania in the heat of the general election at the end of September of last year to visit an ammunition factory and didn't take anyone from the Republican side with him, just a bunch of Democrats. It was essentially a campaign appearance for Kamala Harris. So he's already deep in the thick of American politics. And I think President Trump remembers that and doesn't appreciate it.
And then J.D. Vance shows up in Munich, as does Pete Hegseth. And you have all these European elites. Oh, it's just appalling that the leadership of the United States would inject politics into these speeches. That's never been done in Munich. And here's Zelenskyy for his part. He stops at a campaign rally or stop for Kamala Harris back in September. All Democrats, all radical leftists, not a Republican among them. Right, he's not politicizing anything. None of them do. I mean, they look down their nose at Orange Hitler, and it's he's such an easy target. Listen to this. Well, this is a quote from Forbes. Trump, speaking of his speech yesterday. Well, why don't we just play a bit of it? This is clip 1.
A modestly successful comedian, President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won, that never had to start and never would have started if I was president, not even a chance. And it didn't start for 4 years, never would have started. But a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. They'll never settle that war without our involvement.
So there he is. And again, putting that together with, you know, the talking points he's gotten wrong this week. Is he right? Is Ukraine going to be able to solve this on its own? And some of the things he's been saying this week, I mean, it may be that he's saying it to urge Europe to go it alone without the United States support, which, as we know, it's a horrible, horrible miscalculation. Forbes says Trump also wrote Zelenskyy as a dictator who refuses to have evidently everyone else is sensitive to being labeled as a dictator. They've been doing this with Trump for years. And now all of a sudden they're very upset. He's not a dictator. I mean, he had to cancel the elections. He has to clamp down on free speech. I mean, it's wartime. Okay. But the fact remains, there's no elections. At least not in the foreseeable future. It says the comments came after Zelenskyy told reporters that he would like Trump's team to have more truthful or be more truthful about the war and accused the president of living in a Russia-made disinformation space. And then J.D. Vance responds to that in the Daily Mail saying, I mean, this is outrageous. He's out there openly trashing Donald Trump. And then saying much worse comments behind closed doors. And everybody knows it. Trump said until a couple days ago that they had a deal in place where some of the money that America's put into this war could be repaid in the form of rare earth minerals and such. And then Zelenskyy shut it down, said, doesn't serve Ukraine's interest. Okay. Well, as I say, you're getting a good insight into every nation fending for themselves. I mean, this is like Judges 21:25 grown large. Every man or every nation doing what seems right in his own eyes. You got America first, you've got Ukraine first, Germany first, Europe first. Even Canada's getting in on it. Canada! Who would have ever thought that the sequel to Miracle on Ice now involves our neighbor to the north as the menace, as the big bad guy? We're seeing this world. It's realigning. It's in the midst of a dramatic realignment. It's Judges 21:25 on a mass scale. Here's more from Trump's speech in Florida yesterday, clip 2.
The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed. They get their money back. It's a form of a loan. Nobody knows that. I know that. I said, why isn't somebody saying, you know, we do it the same way? And we spent much more money. We have to equalize.
So when you hear the commentators go on about Trump lied, Trump won't say Putin's the aggressor, Trump's blaming Ukraine for this. How about if we get them on this subject? America's paid $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe, I mean, they're right next door to Russia and Russia's conquest and Russia building its empire. And then the money that Europe gives to the Ukraine war effort, they get it back? It's like a loan, but not America? Trump says it needs to be equal. For one, Europe needs to pay more, but we also should get some of our money back. And Zelenskyy, well, because it's not in Ukraine's interest. Zelenskyy says, no, can't do it. No rare earth minerals for you. Sorry. This is the thanks that America gets for funding the world, funding the whole world. Then the funding shuts off because, as Donald Trump has said, look, we've got to secure our own border. We can't be more concerned about Ukraine's border than our southern border. We've been attacked. We've been invaded. We're in the midst of mass deportations. Again, stepping back, getting God's perspective. How do you solve all these problems? How do you fix it? Why Germany just betrayed America. I gave you these two articles early on. If the United States is pushed out of Europe, the countries of Eastern Europe will need a new champion. They know they cannot stand up to Russia alone. They would rather look to the U.S., but with America gone, Germany remains the only real option. See, this is the part that you don't see out in the open and that you don't hear anyone reporting on it. The fact that there are a lot of powerful German leaders that want the United States out. It's easy to gang up on Trump. What an easy excuse to say, well, we have no choice. We're going to have to lead the European military. We don't have American support. America stabbed us in the back. Germany and Russia's secret war against America. Here again, September 2018, Donald Trump calling them out. You want us to pay for your protection? And meanwhile, you're doing this massive Nord Stream pipeline deal with Russia? Are you serious? Why aren't you having those deals with the United States energy producers? Well, that was a good question. It's because they had a secret war against America. Of course, Vladimir Putin is cheering all of this on. He knows he's winning the Ukraine war, and he knows that the more America dumps hundreds of billions of dollars into the mix, the more that it weakens the American superpower. It benefits Vladimir Putin. No wonder he's willing to spend 900,000 Russian lives for this Ukraine breadbasket. and to really stick it to America, to weaken America. Germany and Russia's secret war against America. You saw that headline only at the Trumpet a few years ago. And wouldn't you know it, it was Donald Trump that looked at that pipeline deal and said, this is not right. You're stabbing us in the back. He calls them out, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it. How do the European nations get away with contributing so little to the Ukraine effort, and then they get their money back in the end? Does that sound fair? Listen to clip 3.
While the United States gets nothing back, so they get their money back. It's a loan. We just give our money. And we had a deal based on rare earth and things, but they broke that deal. But they broke it 2 days ago. We had a deal because I said, we're spending $350 billion, and Europe gets their money back in the form of a loan, and we don't. We're just giving the money hand over fist. That's the Biden administration for you. But they're no longer dealing with the same United States as they were dealing with a few months ago.
He's certainly right about that. Donald Trump is very different than Joe Obama. Zelensky's not dealing with Joe Biden. He's not dealing with Democrats now. He goes and visits the ammunition facility in Pennsylvania back in September. He's there with all kinds of Democrats, but he never politicizes anything. Of course not. He, as Donald Trump correctly said yesterday, the one thing Zelensky's good at is playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. Listen to clip 4.
Why didn't crooked Joe Biden demand equalization, and that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us, and that there's a very big, beautiful ocean, a separation? This is, we're helping Europe. We're trying to help Europe. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money that we sent them is missing. They don't know where the money is. He said, well, we don't know where half of it is. That's great, wonderful. He refuses to have elections. It's low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break. Every city is being demolished. They look like a demolition site, every single one of them. And the only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle.
He played him like a fiddle, and in the end, he ended up meddling in America's democracy. We hear so many left-wing commentators talk about democracy, like they just love it. They're democracy's greatest defenders. Volodymyr Zelenskyy covered up the crimes of the Biden family, including the corruption at Burisma, Hunter. He covered it all up. And then the Hunter laptop shows up, revealing all these facts, and you've got the deep state right here in America covering that up as well. And then an election gets stolen. And as Steve Bannon likes to say, there are consequences for stolen elections. And have we ever seen them? For one, this is when Vladimir Putin decided to unleash his forces on Ukraine 3 years ago. 3 years ago this week. And over that time, 1.6 million people have been slaughtered? And I guess what passes for good commentary is, hey, just keep getting Uncle Sam to pay hundreds of billions of dollars. That's it? I guess that's it. Trump comes along and says, okay, the gravy train has to stop. And, oh, by the way, Zelenskyy doesn't know where half the money went? Zelensky's not willing to give us anything back in return for our $350 billion? Nothing? Sundance says, President Donald Trump begins a very uncomfortable process to peel back the mask that President Zelenskyy represents. This is needed, he says. This is likely to stir a big controversy, but it is needed. Conservative Treehouse has outlined that elements outside our central government, likely CIA clandestine operators in coordination with the GCHQ in the UK. That'll be fun next week when we get the UK Prime Minister coming in saying, you need to pay more money to Ukraine. How do you think Donald Trump's going to receive that message from the radical leftist leader of Britain? Biden was never in control of the Ukraine operation. This is something that started within the U.S. State Department long before Biden was installed. President Trump is now having to deal with a geopolitical consequence that comes from the collaborative IC, the intel community operation that is obviously no longer exclusive to the USA. Now, again, whether Sundance is right on all this corruption, even backed by the CIA here in the U.S., I guess we don't know everything for sure. But how can you not look at Ukraine over the last 7-8 years and not be able to connect the dots on some of this corruption? It's just all over the place. It says, unfortunately for all of us, this is a very concerning, albeit necessary conversation to have. Trump now has the challenge to guide this awakening carefully. It's a very concerning realization for our country to accept that representative government is not in control of things. The amorphous intel community is at the center of it. And again, uncovering the corruption, that's an important angle to this story for sure. The problem, though, here is that with respect to MAGA and people like Sundance, they feel like exposing this corruption in Ukraine is more important than preventing Vladimir Putin from rebuilding his empire. And that's a pretty dangerous false premise to base foreign policy on, to base decisions on. As I say, there's lots of miscalculations happening here. When I heard that speech yesterday that Donald Trump gave down in Miami, it just made me think of that section in Great Again. My father came out with that, in 2016? Donald Trump even used that phrase a time or two when he was campaigning the first time. And my father makes this point. His presidential campaign in 2016 captured the support of this segment of Americans. Mr. Trump does an admirable job of identifying problems and addressing people's concerns. He mentions the slogan, "Make America Great Again." That slogan resonates with a lot of people who believe the U.S. has been mainly a positive force in the world. People who are not embarrassed by the nation's history and unique identity. Anyone who sincerely admires this country wants to see America made great again. It says the Bible has a lot to say about the state of America today. It explains the inspiring reason why this nation was so great in the first place. And then he goes on to say, the Bible also talks about how that curses are going to set in because of our disobedience, because of our own sins, our corruption, sickness through and through. I heard a commentator just yesterday talk about the sickness in America. I mean, that's right out of Isaiah chapter 1. Listen to a couple more clips. Play clip 5 from yesterday.
A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction.
It's going in the wrong direction. He's losing, in other words. This is Donald Trump just pointing out reality. I mean, he's talking about some of the detail in this war that, as I say, you don't even hear from commentators. It's just send money, send money, send money. Listen to one last one, clip 6.
Biden never tried Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably maybe he wants to keep the gravy train going. I don't know what's the problem, but he hasn't been able. He's very upset that he wasn't invited. He could have come if he wanted to, but that he wasn't invited to Saudi Arabia. But he's been working for 3 years. There's never been even meetings or phone calls to stop this war. It's a horrible thing. I figure Russia's lost 900,000 soldiers. I think that Ukraine's lost probably 700,000. And it's a terrible thing. You'll see bodies and body parts all over the field, all over. We see them very accurately through satellites. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions of people have unnecessarily died.
Thou shalt not criticize Zelensky. That's basically been one of the rules of commentary for the last several years. Donald Trump dared to criticize him long before Ukraine ever became the war-torn place that it is. He said, look, there's Burisma, there's the Biden family. You ought to have one of your investigators look into this. Zelensky wouldn't do it. Or if he did, he just covered it up. Back to great again, my father says, America's president says, I will make America great again. Notice the big I. Here's where it's dangerous to put your faith, your trust in a man. I mean, given the problems and the sicknesses we're surrounded by, my father says that attitude is going to usher in the ultimate disaster. Men vainly think they can do magnificent things. That is one of the most deceitful thoughts anyone can have, especially when you're facing the worst disaster ever. Yet that's what we're facing in this time of Jeroboam. We've got to step back and get God's perspective. I've got a couple more stories here I'll just have to get into tomorrow. This last one from foreign policy. It's time for Europe to do the unthinkable. I mean, this is having a momentous impact on Europe. They're thinking about unthinkable activities or actions. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Donald Trump's decision to not even consult with or forewarn European leaders before speaking to Russian President Vladimir Putin shows how irrelevant Europe has become, even when its geopolitical interests are at stake. The only way to restore Europe's geopolitical standing is to consider three unthinkable options. First, Europe should announce its willingness to quit NATO. I mean, if we all have to spend 5% of our GDP on defense, on military, we don't need America. He's right. As our own articles have said, you put Europe together and there's a superpower there. And the Bible talks about it being a mixture of iron and clay. So it has been difficult to pull this together. But now you see they've got some motivation. They've got the incentive. The second thing we should consider, this is number two on the unthinkable actions. Unthinkable option number 2, work out a new grand strategic bargain with, you guessed it, Russia. So we should deal with Vladimir Putin. Now, how dare Donald Trump do that? But we in Europe, the elites in Europe, we can do it. We should. We've done it historically. We've done it secretively. Every man for himself. You see the spirit? And that leads to unthinkable option number 3. Work out a new strategic compact with, you guessed it, China. Yeah, think of the Mart of Nations, Isaiah 23. Basically, the underlying point here, let's align each other in opposition to the United States. We've got the perfect excuse to just dogpile on the U.S. Look at, they've got Orange Hitler. And then this article says at the very end, I mean, what we need is our own Donald Trump figure. Well, you're going to get that. You're going to get a strong man. He's going to come in by flatteries, the Bible says. And then you'll have your $1 trillion, if everyone's contributing 5%, toward a united European military force. The armed forces of Europe, as Zelenskyy called them. Wow. Wow. Look at what we are witnessing. I took you a minute over, but I'm not going to charge you for any of those extra seconds. There's just so much to cover. The fastest moving hour in broadcasting. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Thank you for joining us on today's show, and we'll see you again tomorrow.